All right. Welcome everyone to the Cluster Addons meeting. Today is Tuesday, the 24th of November. We had a bit of a discussion earlier. We weren't quite sure if the meeting was going to happen because of US holidays.
We're all here though, so we figured we'd record this since we're all chatting. Thanks to everyone for joining. We had an awesome KubeCon last week from many perspectives. And so hopefully some of you were able to join in with those, you could almost call them festivities. Joe joined today and just asked the question, what is an add-on, like in the context of this group? And so we started chatting about that a little bit. When we set up this group, our first mission was really just to provide some uniformity and reuse in the space of installation and cluster lifecycle management, which is one of the reasons why we're part of SIG cluster lifecycle. And so the add-ons that we're primarily focused on were things like kubeproxy, core DNS, and CNI implementations. There's a huge array of things that need to be in place when a cluster comes up. Other categories are network policies that you might want in place from the very beginning of the life cycle of the cluster. You might install that as a package, or something like an admission controller, or a mutating webhook of some sort that changes the way that the API server works. So a lot of these things are directly related to the life cycle of a cluster. When you'd upgrade the cluster, you'd probably want to think about updating some of these add-ons either before or after. But then Joe kind of started talking about this project that he's working on called Kube Addons with D2IQ. And Kube Addons does more than it's a more generic definition with just Helm charts and kudo operators being available for install. So Justin mentioned that we've really been focusing on keeping the space as uniform as possible because there's so much sprawl in people who are, or in projects that people are trying to use to do things on top of Kubernetes. So we have a lot of libraries in place or that we've been using to accomplish this group's goals, and we would love for people to use those even if they're outside of the scope of what we started the group to talk about. And of course, this is a community, so we're always open to expanding the mission statement, in an intentional manner. But yeah, that's kind of what we went over. We talked a little bit about KubeBuilder declarative pattern as well, and what that's used for. And of course, we have the docs if you're tuning in at a later date and want to look at that. So there was an agenda item, quite interesting one, for talking about KubeBuilder declarative patterns use in cluster API provider nested, which is a virtual cluster implementation that Chris Hine and others from the CAPI project are working on. But Chris does not seem to be able to join today. It is Thanksgiving week, so we might just push that to next meeting. But Daniel did bring up that maybe we should talk about Evan's KEP regarding manifest bundles. And I do think that this is an important item for us to address. Justin, you mentioned that you would try to follow up with Evan to see what we could do to get it merged, since the feedback seems to be pretty complete there.
Yeah, I will. We had some final items. There was a little bit of back and forth on the discussion, but we weren't sure whether Evan wanted to put anything else into the KEP itself. It does seem that the KEP is in a perfectly adequate place to proceed, and so if no one else objects, then we can merge it. But I will also ping Evan immediately after this meeting to just see if he did want to make any final tweaks.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about the contents of this KEP, and I do think that it's something that needs to be addressed in the community. I don't have any contention against it, so I'll say so. I guess that'll just make it easier to merge. Cool. Well, those were our primary agenda items. Hopefully we'll be able to get to this cluster API provider nested topic yeah, I guess at our next meeting, which would be on what, the 8th of December or so.
Yes.
Yeah, or maybe Chris can come by in the Slack channel again, and we can talk more on it. But yeah, that work is really cool, and we should, you know, if you're interested, tuning in later, or if you're here now and want to take a look at what they would be trying to use Kubernetes declarative pattern for, I think this is actually quite a good use case, because sometimes using an operator for just plain manifest can be a little bit of a thin abstraction, something that's really complex that doesn't provide a lot of value, because things could be computed, you know, beforehand in a declarative manner. But in this case, where we're actually talking about scheduling like nested API servers to a cluster, managing crypto, making sure that things are hooked up together, that they live in a namespace, and that there's an easy abstraction for somebody to control the declarative runtime of this, that you can upgrade the control plane. Like there's a whole slew of things that need to be dealt with there, and it requires packaging some manifests into the operator. It's a perfect use case for exactly that kind of thing. Go and take a look at the work they're doing there.
Yeah,
very cool stuff.
I just say, like, I didn't really understand the detail of the question, but it certainly sounds well within the scope of it. It's certainly it's not technically a cluster add-on, but it's, as you say, like it's exactly the same thing. It's just that it's actually doing, like, I guess, a different cluster. But
yeah, they would be using the cluster custom resource from their project, but then the operator would be feeding that to actually template the add-on, you know, and,
yeah, I mean,
and then manage the state of it. And maybe there are some of the shared fields, you know, from that we might want to have inside of the cluster object.
Exactly. Yes, like it would be wonderful to see how far we can, to what extent we can reuse the patterns from add-ons for what is a related but slightly different use case. And I think the same applies to Joe, your point earlier, like to what extent, sure, it might not be exactly the same thing, but can you actually sort of stretch the definition a little bit, like, and have it work?
Yeah, I haven't written a Kudo operator myself, but assuming that there's some place where you can write your own Go inside of a reconcile when using Kudo, you could, or if you wanted to expose part of the framework, you could certainly use part of the declarative pattern libraries to do the same thing.
Kudo's all YAML.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then Kudo would need to provide a way to generate that code, and then you would declare it from YAML and say, hey, I want to use this library. Assuming that it's implemented in Go, which I remember, I think it is. So what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, it was to your point, Justin, about like not really knowing what the question is that Chris was bringing up. And just to provide a little bit of context, Chris did DM me. He was wondering, like, hey, do you think the cluster Addons group is healthy? Do you think that what we're producing like has longevity? Do you think these patterns are good? Is this something that we can adopt and rely on and continue working with? And I felt very good about it. Yeah, I said, yeah, we should, you know, totally be able to have a healthy maintenance relationship if you decide to use KubeBuilder declarative pattern and kind of synergy with the rest of the ecosystem that's being built inside of Cluster API. Does anyone disagree with that? Or?
I'll feel happier once we get it integrated into COPS and KubeADM, but and Cluster API. But I think we're making good progress at the moment, so I think it's good.
Yeah, we could probably talk with Rusty and Fabricio again. I wasn't able to ever get an invite to their KubeADM next like refactoring session. I don't know if that ended up happening. but maybe I'll go check in with them again and see what the results were of them thinking about using more modern patterns to kind of rebuild parts of Kubernetes.
Oh, I just remembered. I sent a sorry. I sent a PR that is sort of odd because it's different. One of the things that came up a bunch was being able to take a manifest and refactor it into like RBAC and non-RBAC and make changes to it. Like that's based on what Santoshi did in Google Summer of Code, and the idea that we want to do more of these. And sort of, I started to think about how we're going to actually maintain those manifests going forwards. We've certainly had a bit of a challenge with doing it in COPS where we can check in the mutated version, but then we're never quite sure why things changed. And so I sent a first work in progress, well, just MVP PR, just to sort of start creating a pipeline that can mutate YAML so that we can take an upstream one and run it through a series of transforms, like adding labels or removing labels or things like that, and produce the manifest that we are splitting it out. All of those things are sort of in my mind. I think the only thing it does right now is removing a label, I believe. I think that's maybe an interesting one to think about. Like, do we want to proceed in that direction to try to create the manifests from upstream manifests until we can eventually get people building cluster add-ons by default, which will happen one day. But until then, we're going to have to translate from Helm charts or YAML files or whatever it is into a more amenable format for us. I will find a link to that PR and put it in.
I think I just linked it. It's poll 89, right? Your MVP for YAML transformation helper.
That's the one. Thank you.
Yeah. So if we say we're to just look at that really quick so that folks who are watching any recordings, say after the holidays, would have the context. Daniel, can you enable screen sharing maybe? Do you have a host right now? Yeah.
Sure. Hang on.
Yeah, no, it's not a big deal. It's just Zoom stuff.
Does it work now?
Probably, yeah. Looks good. There we go. So yeah, I should be able to see this patch that I have here. Just Justin's mentioning that we need to manipulate YAML bundles from various sources, right? So you were talking about Helm charts and customization directories and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, whatever we eventually get from the upstream add-ons projects, whatever their preferred means is. So the hope is that we can get some form of raw YAML out from whatever pipeline they use, and then we're gonna have to change it in some way.
So you have a CLI that is in what, this directory? You have a directory.
I think it's in a tools maybe. Yeah, tools.
Camel. Cool.
And it's a little verbose because it reuses a library in Customize called KYAML, which has the very nice feature that preserves comments. So if you do have comments, it won't. Well,
then we won't clobber that. So exactly. You still get the comment on like, here's how to use this environment variable, or this is deprecated, or
exactly right. It does have the downside that, like, for example, removing a label is a little bit more verbose than you might imagine, because so if you have a look at field underscore clearer.
Field clearer func.
There it is. You can see this is the sort of, you sort of have to loop over a tree of the YAML nodes. You have to basically work in the YAML nodes and like very much.
Oof. Yeah, this is
so
definitely some Lambda magic. I have to open up the fourth layer of my brain.
You do, but there are layers that are then built on this that are much more palatable. So if you look at like remove.go, for example, you'll see that we end up in a much more, like, there are some nasty things at the bottom, which hopefully you don't have to look at too much. And then there are some nicer things at the top.
Field paths.
Yeah.
We have a transform object from somewhere that then parses the field paths, and it says that in these fields, which are, okay, like dot notation for, so here you're even doing nested things, then you use a field clearer, and then there's a predicate function that you put in that says like, oh, if it matches something. Is that how that works?
Exactly right. It looks at the keys of the labels and
yeah, so if you put that in, yeah, the predicate is looking at the key. And this is the remove label filter. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's cool. Anyway, this kind of stuff is exactly why we have this project, so that this code doesn't go die in a hole somewhere after you used it for one thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, so thanks for that. Yeah, KYAML is a pretty useful library, but definitely very different strategy to working with Kubernetes resources, that's for sure. Very well keyed for working with incomplete resources, patches, and things when you don't have access to an API server, which is a lot of the time. So, sweet. Yeah, we have well, I guess not so. We've had quite a few people join this meeting. Anyway, would you be looking for a review from somebody in particular on this, Justin? Sorry, I didn't know about this patch.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's start off with feedback on the idea, whether it belongs here, whether there's some other tool we could use. I do think it would be possible to embed this into Kustomize. And so we can create a customization YAML to describe this. It may also be possible to embed it into the KPT tool, which would also work the same way. But I'm sort of starting with the simplest thing, which is just a CLI pipeline, but we'll have a bash. So we would use this using a sort of bash series of pipes. I think we can get that into Kustomize. But if there's some other way that we should be looking at instead, like that would be super helpful. And then before we like dig into the code details, right? Let's figure out if there's some other tool we should actually use instead.
I do wonder if something like remove go could be feasibly done with just like a JQ program.
Possibly.
Like,
yes.
Is this sensitive to kinds or anything like that?
This one isn't, but I have more ones where I've done things like remove volumes. So you can certainly, I'm sure we can express it as JQ or YQ or whatever it might be. The real hope is that we build things that are actually much more aware of Kubernetes.
Of Kubernetes in general.
Yeah.
My favorite JQ derivative is this by ItchyNY GoJQ. It's a pure Go implementation that has the same command line interface as JQ, but it also supports parsing YAML and outputting to YAML.
That is a good feature.
Yeah, and it's a single statically compiled binary instead of like trying to find an installation of JQ, which seems to sometimes be out of date on distros. But, cool. Sweet. Well, let's get some feedback on this, and let's bring this up again if it's still open in 2 weeks, because we want to make some progress on building a little bit of an ecosystem around packaging for the operators.
Yeah, we're just figuring out how we get YAMLs, because people have given us feedback they want more operators, and I think it's certainly, this is the first question that comes up, like where does the YAML come from and how do we maintain it and how do we make sure it's up to date? So
yeah, and certainly there's an entirely like there's a whole kind of use case or persona or business driver or whatever you want to kind of phrase it as, which is that like these tools can be really hard to build. They come with overhead and complexity, but if you are a vendor, or a project that's trying to package your tooling for somebody who, maybe is low expertise in just getting started with Kubernetes, then the operator can help you, perform upgrades and things like that in a way where you can do the engineering effort and it reduces the burden on whoever's kind of consuming your tool. And that's just going to be an ever-growing market. Great. Thanks for submitting that patch. Does anybody else or does anyone else want to comment on that in particular? If not, suggest your own thing. Otherwise, we could probably end the meeting. Sweet. Well, I guess just the last bit is that we've had some. Since we have time, what is this? Just gonna link something related that I built. Oh, I should probably put that in the meeting agenda. Here we go. I built a demo using Flux and how it relates to bootstrapping clusters with Cluster API, and how you can use GitOps to have a fully declarative approach to configuring clusters that are created via Cluster API provider. So this could, we've talked a lot in the past couple of months about how our add-ons approaches can compose, and this is just another, CNCF project that we can use, or it's an example of how these things can compose well together for users. So whatever declarative add-on definitions we have, whatever packages and images that we're shipping, if we don't use the application things that are built directly into Cluster API, you can still integrate with them around the artifacts that Cluster API produces, like the kubeconfig secrets and things. So if that's a curiosity, please feel free to fork the demo and try it out yourself. And, sweet. Well, that link's in the agenda document as well. It's on a repo called stealthybox/cappy-flux-demo. I think we're at the end of our agenda. So thanks so much for joining for the Thanksgiving week. And I look forward to seeing all of you, as well as hearing more from Chris the next time that we chat about the nested provider work that they're doing for virtual clusters and how that can relate with KubeBuilder declarative pattern. It's also a follow-up on Evan's KEP. Everybody stay safe out there, and see you later.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, friends.
Bye.